Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Sim Pilot, and today we are going to look at how to know when you want to begin your descent in your Airbus A320 in Microsoft Flight Simulator or any other simulator in which you're using an Airbus. And to be honest, it probably applies to a few other jet airliners as well. So we'll have a look at the technique and we'll get an idea of how we can do that. Once again, we're going to use Microsoft Flight Simulator and the fly-by-wire A320neo mod. I highly recommend you get this mod installed if you're going to be using the A320neo in Microsoft Flight Simulator, because it does make a big difference to the experience and definitely adds to the realism, and it's always improving. So yeah, highly recommended. We're currently in flight. We've taken off from Madrid airport in Spain. We're going to head to Ibiza, also in Spain, with that short flight taking us up to a cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. And what we're going to look at now is how can we judge when we want to begin our descent from here into our destination airport. As ever, I am a real-world Airbus pilot, but this is not for any real-world use. It's just for our use in flight simulators of all varieties at home, and hopefully it can give you some extra context on your home simulation. Right, let's get started. Here we are in the cruise now, and to give you some context, I will show you on the VFR map exactly what we're doing. We've taken off from Madrid over here. We're already over, well, almost at Charlie Lima Sierra, and then we're going to head in towards Ibiza. The arrival planned, this was just done in the Microsoft Flight Simulator planning tool, but it's got a star arrival and in to an ILS onto runway 06, I think it is, at Ibiza. So how are we going to work out when we want to descend? Well, the simplest way is what I'm going to give you first, and this is a pretty robust way of doing it, and it's something that I use every day when I'm flying the aircraft as well. What we're going to do is take our altitude. We want to times it by 3, and that will give us the track miles we need to descend. It's typically a 3-degree approach path by doing that. So as we can see here, I have 33,000 feet altitude. The airport I'm landing at is at sea level. Ibiza is pretty much at sea level. So I need to lose 33,000 feet. I need to be able to descend that much down before I can land. So if I times that by 3, 33,000 times 3 is going to obviously be 99. I need 99 track miles. I say track miles because that is the track I'm going to fly. I'm going to fly along this green line. That's my track. And as you can see, as we get closer, there's a little bit of a wobble in the line as we fly that arrival, which I can show you quite easily on the VFR chart. We're going to fly all of this. Now, that is the route I'm going to fly if I just leave the autopilot flying. So for this first example, we'll just say we're expecting to fly all of that. So I need 99 track miles. We're also going a bit fast, and we will be in the descent. The Airbus typically descends somewhere from 250 to maybe 280, 90. You can even descend at 330 knots if you really want to, although that's a little bit rare. If we go into the perf page in the MCDU and press next phase, we can see the different speeds. So this plane is going to descend at 287 knots. Anyway, despite that, all I'm trying to point out is we actually will need to slow down as well from our speed in the descent to our approach speed. So we need to give some room for that. So we said we need 99 miles because we did 33,000 times 33 by 3 means 99 miles plus 10, 109 miles. So we're going to need to start our descent 109 miles before the airport or before the touchdown. As you can see, if I go to the MCDU, I can press flight plan and it will show me my track miles left to run. So this says 272. I know that I actually need, as we said, 109 miles to descend and slow down. So I've got a little bit of time left, over about 150 miles plus before I need to begin my descent. So when this number here says 109, I will start my descent, and I'll do that by winding the altitude down to whatever I think is safe next, and then I will do open descent. So engage selected altitude. I'll pull that towards me and let it go to thrust idle, because the descent we've just calculated is based on the aircraft using idle thrust and descending like that at the speed, roughly the correct speed in here. So that's a typical way in the Airbus. It's very rough, it's not perfect, you can't rely on it to get you exactly to the runway, but what you can do is keep updating it as you go down and as you descend. In the real aircraft as well, we'd get an arrow showing up on the green line here, which I'll show you later in X-Plane, just in case it's added to this mod in the future, and that way you'll have seen it and already know what it means. It also shows up in the MCDU. It would say TD, top of descent. So it does have different ways to tell you. So to recap, 33,000 feet. I need to times that by 3, 99. Gives me the distance I need, plus 10 miles to slow down, so 109 miles. And that's track miles. That's the miles I'm going to actually fly. So as you can see, I've got 272 miles left to run. So I need to descend when that says 109. The descent I'm going to do, I'm going to pull the altitude, lower the altitude first, and then pull as I do in my autopilot basics tutorial. So if you need help using the autopilot, I can show you that in the video, hopefully appearing on the screen now. Something to be aware of is that this is using track miles, as we said. If I was to go back to the normal page, so I go to arc and wind out the range, let's put it to 160, you can see that actually Ibiza Airport here, LEIB, is a little bit closer than we think. It's not actually 272 miles away. It's maybe 80, just over 80, so perhaps 90 miles away. This means that if we were to go straight in, we don't have as many miles as the flight plan is suggesting, 272. In fact, I don't think that 272 is particularly accurate today. It doesn't seem to be counting down either, so I would say it definitely isn't accurate. So how are we going to get around that? What we need to do is look on the navigation display and judge where the airport is. As we can see, it's about 90 miles away in a straight line, but we know we have that extra sort of turning to do to turn onto final because of the nature of the arrival that we have loaded in. So what I'm going to do is start my descent probably fairly shortly, because the best thing to do, and what we do in real life, is even if you see a long arrival like this on the VFR map, you would be ready for a straight in, because you don't necessarily need to fly all of this. So what I can do is judge it that when I'm 109 miles from the airport on my navigation display, that is also a good time to begin my descent. And as you can see, I'm actually at 80 miles already. So I think it's time to start down. First of all, I'm going to put in flight level 100 just to get my descent going. Then I'm going to pull thrust idle open descent. This will be an idle descent, and down we go. So we've calculated our top of descent by timesing our cruise altitude by 3 and then adding a little bit for room to slow down, because we'll need a bit of miles to slow down the speed. If we have a tailwind, you would also need to add more. So if we had, say, this arrow was from behind, so our ground speed was even higher, we would need to start the descent even earlier. So maybe if you see that arrow pointing from behind you, so pointing up on this screen whilst you're in the cruise, so in this situation, then you would need to start your descent even earlier. Likewise, if it's pointing towards you and it was strong, 50 knots, then you might need to start your descent a little bit later. But as a rough guide, if you plan on that 3 times plus a little bit extra, you'll be in a pretty good place. So why do we do 3 times? Well, it's something that we use all the time flying. It's our 3 times table, our 3-degree approach. 3-degree approach means compared to a level, we're going to descend at an angle of 3 degrees. So if level is 0, then we're slightly up at 3 degrees and we descend down, just like your ILS approach is usually a 3-degree approach. That's why if we descend at 3 degrees, that system of doing 3 times your altitude will work. So how do we know we're descending at 3 degrees now? Well, you don't really. It's just a rough guide, and it typically works out. These aircraft at thrust idle tend to be close to 3 degrees. We can actually calculate this now. To work out if you're doing 3-degree descent, take your ground speed, 430, divide it by 2, which is 215, and then if you take your 215 and times it by 10, you'll get 2,150. So to make a 3-degree descent, I need to descend at 2,150 feet per minute, which is on the vertical speed indicator here. You can see we're actually doing 2,700 feet per minute. So we're doing better than 3 degrees, which is great because we have a little bit of a tailwind. As I said, that arrow is behind us. You'll typically be slightly faster on your descent higher up, so you'll have more than a 3-degree descent. And then as you get lower and you'll reduce the speed, that will reduce. So to know if you are at least making 3-degree descent, you can look at the vertical speed. And as I said, take this number, your ground speed, GS is ground speed, it's your speed over the ground, because that's what matters, because we're landing at a fixed point in space, Ibiza Airport. Your TAS is your true airspeed, which is a different figure. We're just interested in the ground speed. So you take this, divide it by 2, and then you can times it by 10 or just take it and divide it by 2. So for example, when this says 400, I will need to divide it by 200, so I need to do 2,000 feet per minute on the vertical speed indicator to make sure I'm keeping a 3-degree descent. And that is something I use every day, and a lot of pilots use it. It's relatively simple maths, but it's something that we all find useful because it applies to the job so much. So to recap, we'll take our altitude, 21 or 22,000 feet now, times it by 3, which gives us obviously 66 miles that we need, plus 10. So we need 76 miles for our descent. To make sure we are flying the descent correctly, we take our speed, 404, divide it by 2, so 200, and then make that 2,000 feet per minute for our descent. So what do you do if your speed and your vertical speed are not matching up? What if you're not descending fast enough? Well, first of all, make sure you have pulled the altitude with the little down arrow to make sure it says thrust idle open descent. Then, if that's not working, or you think you're high, like I now can see that if I was to go straight to Ibiza, I'm only 40 miles away. We just said I need about 70 miles, which will work with this routing, maybe, but I think I'm actually still a bit high. So what can I do? Well, the first thing we do at this sort of altitude is increase the speed. So if you pull the speed, you have control of it now, and you'll see it go blue on the PFD, and now you can increase it. So I'm going to wind the speed up. If you do it carefully, there we go. And I wouldn't go more than 330 knots. If it's not smooth air, you wouldn't wind the speed up, you'd do something else. But by doing that, you can see we immediately get a much higher rate of descent. Even that's a little bit excessive. You get a much higher rate of descent, and you have a much higher speed. The reason this works is because you have a lot more drag at higher speed. There's a lot more air hitting the aircraft, and that gives you more drag, which means you descend quicker. So as you can see, although our ground speed has increased again, we're back at 420 knots, our vertical speed is going to be significantly higher. So this is the simplest way initially to do it. But when we get lower, we can't do this anymore. Also, because we're so fast, we need to be able to get that speed back again. So how do we do that? Well, there's a really obvious way. So for example, if air traffic now insists on 250 knots, or we're too close to the terrain, so we don't want that very high rate of descent, then obviously put out those speed brakes. In the A320, they only work up to 50%. After 50%, they don't actually deploy anymore, although you can move the lever, but it doesn't do anything. However, I'm not sure if that's true in the Microsoft Flight Simulator A320, even with the Neo mod, so I'm not entirely sure yet. But there we go. Now with the speed brake out, you'll see a rapid deceleration. The real aircraft wouldn't level off like this. It would continue some sort of a descent because air traffic gets very confused if you level off. But there we go. So now 250 knots with the speed brake out, and we are going to regain that profile with a higher rate of descent thanks to the speed brake. Remember as well, once you are descending, to keep monitoring your progress. So now I can see I'm 30 miles away from Ibiza. If I was to go in a straight line there and try and land, I'm slightly high because I'm at 12,000 feet. So I need 36 miles, and it's only 30 miles. Plus I need a bit more to slow down. So it gives you a constant update. You can constantly adjust. You can work out whether your 3 degrees is working or not. So I've put the speed brakes back in, as you can see there. They are fully forward. And my vertical speed now is 1400, ground speed of 313. So actually I'm doing slightly less than 3 degrees because at 300 knots I need to be doing 1500 feet per minute. So this might be a time to use the speed brake again. I have some videos showing MCDU setup, but what I'm going to do here is set up my arrival, which you would have done in the cruise in reality, to the ILS 06 Zulu in Ibiza. Then I'm going to insert that, and that is now loaded in. As we can see, the track miles seems to be frozen, so don't rely on that too much, the distance to go. Now, if I go to RadNav, I can see the ILS 06 has been tuned by the aircraft. So if I select ILS or LS here in the real aircraft, there it is. It will display your distance. So I can see I'm 20 miles from the runway, which is the same as what I can see on my navigation display, but it's just another backup. This is not a reliable gauge a long way out. More than sort of 30 miles out, and this number will not be very relevant. So don't rely on it for long distance navigation. That's where we will use VORs and other features, which I'll show you in X-Plane shortly. But it does have its uses and especially when you're on final approach, you can use it there to judge your height as well. So here we are now in X-Plane 11, and this way I can show you a few other features that we use in the real aircraft. Once again, we are flying from Madrid to Ibiza at 33,000 feet at the moment, as you can see. Similar sort of routing, but now we have a few extra little details I can show you. First of all, let's have a look at the down arrow. This does occasionally appear in Microsoft Flight Simulator, so you may see it. It's this white arrow here. This shows us our top of descent. That is where the aircraft expects us to begin our descent from our cruise flight level of flight level 330. We would of course check that ourselves and cross-check it, but it is a useful indicator. I've got the exact same arrival loaded into the flight plan, so if I scroll through on the flight plan page, you can see that it is identical. And we'll zoom in a bit so you can actually see what's going on. There we go, and in and around and all of that. So the magic of the real aircraft as well is I can bring up the MCDU, press progress, and I get this page, bearing distance. So I know I'm landing in Ibiza onto runway 06. I've got Ibiza 06 there, and if we select the arrival, it is the ILS 06 Zulu, same as before. If I go to the progress page, I can now type in LEIB, which is the airport code, and I can actually get this from the flight plan page, LEIB, and I'm landing on runway 06. So I type it in there, then press progress and enter it here with this line select key. Now it shows me 207 miles to go to the threshold of that runway. Once again, we can use the same calculations, 33, so as we said, it's going to be 99, so 109 miles required to descend, so about 100 miles from now. That would be if we go straight in, because this is a straight line to the airport. So I expect to descend in about 100 miles. Where is my descent point on the navigation display? It's in about 80 miles. That's probably because the MCDU has altitude restrictions. So you don't have to always plan just on your descent to the runway. You can also plan on different altitudes. So this wants us to actually be 3,000 feet and fly most of that arrival. So all of that, all those curves and turns on the last stage of the approach, all of this is going to be flown at 3,000 feet according to the MCDU. But we're not going to do that today. We'll plan on potentially cutting the corner just as we did earlier. So the MCDU will account for altitude restrictions like that. And that will be the case in Microsoft Flight Simulator eventually, I hope. So yeah, be aware of that. This straight in may not always match up for that reason. It depends on the altitude constraints on the arrival or departure that you are flying. Okay, so we have our down arrow. That's one feature we have here. And we have the progress page that shows us our distance to go. So these are two things we can use for our descent in the Airbus in X-Plane 11. Let's have a look what happens when we actually begin our descent. To illustrate this point, what I'm going to do is send us direct, and I'm going to send us direct to, we're going to skip out the entire arrival. Let's go to the final approach fix for the ILS 06 in Ibiza. So I've done direct to that point. We go to plan now. We can actually see I'm going straight there and in, and I've got to be there at 2,000 feet. Now my track miles show me an accurate distance, 194, so I would expect to descend in around about 80 miles at the latest. If we go to arc, we can see our descent point is about 70 miles, so that works. Seems pretty reasonable. Now, in this aircraft, because we have vertical navigation, I don't have to pull this and go into a thrust idle open descent. Again, talking about our autopilot modes, I could actually use a managed descent mode where it will follow its profile loaded into the box, which makes my life very easy. What I can also do is I can see top of descent in the MCDU T/D top of descent. It shows me where it's coming, and that is drawn then on the navigation display. It tells me the time I'm going to arrive there, so 13:53. It's currently 13:45. As we reach our top of descent arrow, our little white down arrow, we will get a message shown to us by the aircraft. So let's just have a look at what that is. Just for context, we are currently 130 miles from our destination. As we pass over the arrow, we can expect a message saying decelerate. There it is. It says decelerate, and if we look on the MCDU, we get the same message saying decelerate. The reason is If you can't descend because air traffic control isn't letting you, you need to do something else to get the energy out of the aeroplane. So if I now bring the speed back, let's say 0.71, which is reasonable, it's above our green dot speed in the cruise. I can press clear on the MCDU to get rid of the decelerate message, and this way we are reducing the energy in the aircraft even though we know we are getting high. And now if I begin my descent, let's start again with flight level 100, and I pull, thrust idle, open descent, there's our 100, and as you can see we are now starting our descent. I can now wind the speed up because I'm in a thrust idle open descent. Let's put it all the way up to 0.78, and the airplane will put the nose down, it will do a high rate of descent, and we'll have a chance to get back to where we want to be because we took the energy out by slowing down earlier. Something else we get in the Toliss A321 is the yo-yo, or donut as it's called depending. It's this little green, you can see it's half a circle here on the bottom of the altimeter tape. This shows us the predicted profile or the calculated profile in the aircraft. When we're on profile, we will be in line with this green donut. So if I keep increasing that speed, let's do 0.79, and if I use some speed brake, you can use full speed brake in the 321, but you can't in the 320, with the autopilot in, I should say. Without the autopilot in the A320, you can use full speed brake, but with the autopilot engaged, you can only use half. Whereas in the 321, even with the autopilot, we can use full speed brake. So there we go. I'll put that away, and that's the green. Some people call it donut, some people call it yo-yo. That gives you a good idea if you're on the calculated profile that the computer, the MCDU, has predicted for your arrival. We're now below it, which is good because we're fast, so I'm going to press manage speed, and now because the airplane is going to start slowing down to that speed, we'll actually start to reduce that rate of descent and probably come back towards that profile. I can also, on the MCDU, I can see that with the vertical deviation, VDEV. I am currently 1,300 feet below the profile. As we get closer, that will change to closer to 0. So this is just another tool we have to calculate our descent, but even with all of these great features, I will still be looking at my total distance, 100 miles, I'm at 23,000 feet, so I need 60, I need about 70 miles, and plus 10, I need about 80 miles, so yeah, I'm in a good place. I've got room to get down and decelerate, even with that tailwind. You can see that we actually need that tailwind, we need that descent to be slightly earlier today because of this 40 knot tailwind. The arrow is behind us. Now minus 300 if we're getting back towards the profile, and just as we're reaching the profile, this green donut or yo-yo, you can see we are at idle speed on the thrust, and now the aircraft will lower the nose and we'll end up back on the profile. Alternatively, of course, I can push 1 dot or push the altitude control towards the aircraft. We'll go into DES mode where it will follow the vertical profile itself with a little bit of adjustment on the speed range, which is the simplest way. It certainly requires less effort or thought, but even then you're going to be backing up very closely the numbers with what you predict. And also, if you're expecting, as we're getting a straight-in approach, you just have to be ready for all these different things to change. So it's just about managing the energy so you don't find yourself either too low and having to fly in with the engine spooled up too long, which is obviously not very efficient, or too high where you can't make a safe approach because you're just too high and you need to fly for extra track miles to get yourself in, which is also not very efficient. So we like to try and get it right the first time if we can. So there we have a few tools to help you plan your start of descent in the Airbus. For all of these things, we have to be aware of terrain. If the terrain is causing you to be high, you can't descend into it, obviously, so you'll have to slow down or come up with other plans like using speed brakes or flaps later on in the approach if you need to. So this is very much a basic when there's no terrain issue sort of guide. As you get closer in, keep updating your plan and keep looking at those altitudes that you're aiming for and how many miles you think you need to your touchdown. That's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been useful for you. Just a few more tips and tricks to hopefully get you through your A320 flights in flight simulators at home. There will be more tutorials and tips coming on the channel soon, as well as other live streams in both Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane. So do please subscribe if you'd like to see more of those in the near future. That's it then. Thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you again in another video soon. Keep safe and well. Thank you. Bye bye.